I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
Yeah, this is my third bottle. So I misunderstood the instructions and the premise of the podcast interview.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? Got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I've been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cabernet and Pray. This is the podcast where we get to drink wine, talk about theology and God and all those things, and just explore wherever these conversations take us. And today's going to be a wild one. We've got a friend of mine that listeners to previous podcasts of mine will perhaps recognize today's guest. It's my friend, Jef Caine, who I had previously done a different podcast with, and we decided it's time to get him on to Cabernet and Pray. A little setup on who Jef is, and if you're keeping track of Jef, it's constantly changing. So this is the latest as of today. Jef would say he's a former Christian, former church staffer, pretty critical of religion these days, but still spiritually curious. He's a freelance illustration and graphic design, animation, part-time barista, lots of things he does. Here's a fun fact. He's currently living in a van trying to practice homelessness and non-materialism. So we're going to get into that a little bit. He has a weird hang up that all Christians should be vegan. I think he would go further than just Christians, but we'll see. And he said he's uncertain about almost everything, but he's still trying to figure it out. Welcome to the podcast, Jef.
Hello, Jeremy. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
You had a mustache the last time you and I podcasted. The mustache is gone.
It's true. Yeah. I've gone through quite a few life changes since then. And yeah, the shaving the mustache was something of a ritualistic acknowledgement of, my new life, or at least where I'm at the moment. Yes.
The new you is mustacheless. Okay. What else do we need to know about you that I didn't cover in the little bio points there?
Oh boy, I think all I should say is I should just apologize in advance, because I realized that I sort of invited myself onto this show. Like I felt like maybe I had some kind of special access because we're former podcasters together. And, I realized that I have a lot of opinions. I can be kind of preachy and pretentious and probably pretty off-putting for a lot of your audience. So again, I just apologize in advance, and I should acknowledge that my own personal life is a total mess and no one should take advice from me. So that's what I have to say.
Well, we'll let the listeners to decide what they do with what you say, because maybe they'll be really intrigued by it. Maybe they like it. So we'll see how it goes. But first, it's time to drink some wine, Jef, because that's what we do on this podcast. We never got to drink wine on our other one, but we do on this one. Fun fact, Jef's actually in my kitchen right now. So we're in the same place. So we're actually drinking the same wine today. So you're going to get two takes on the same bottle. This is called a History Red Blend. This is a 2019. This comes from a partnership of one of my favorite wineries in Oregon, Stoller family. And they have this kind of like side label that they do that's History brand. And this one's a blend of primarily Cabernet Sauvignon, so 73%, 25% Malbec, and then a little bit of Merlot and Cab Franc thrown in. This is like one of my go-to. I love this wine. Every year it delivers. It's very consistent, very balanced. And as I was enjoying it today, I'm getting a lot of red plum, both on the nose and on the palate. So I really like it. Jeff, what do you think? What's your take on this wine?
I'm trying to think of something smart to say. It tastes good to me. I think I can detect some of the plum, though it's difficult to say if I'm actually tasting that or if it's just the power of suggestion. You know what I mean?
The power
That's
of
another
suggestion
thing
is a real thing with wine.
That's another thing I should probably apologize for. I'm not a very good wine snob. I feel like in my in my past like drinking life, I don't know. I feel like I tried a little bit to be sophisticated about it, but ultimately just gave up and usually just went for whatever the cheapest bottom shelf option was. And yeah, I'm sorry to say this, Jeremy. I know I'm going to be a Philistine for saying this to you, but it generally tasted the same to me, the cheap versus the expensive stuff.
You know what? You're not alone. A lot of people feel that. And, I would say I started with drinking the cheap stuff. And that's how I developed the love of wine and box wine and tried all of that. And as I got more into it, I started developing more of an appreciation, more of the ability to taste good wine, had the opportunity to try nicer wine. That's what really will ruin it for you is if you regularly try nice wine, then you go back to the cheap stuff. Most people can go, whoa, this is really different. But we're not about making wine snobs on this show, Jeff. So all views of wine are welcome. We're just grateful that you drink. And fun fact, you pitched me an idea, which is what originally I thought, okay, this will be fun. We got to do this. This is a special glass of wine for you today. This is not just because it's good wine that you would not have bought yourself, but this is a special glass. Why don't you tell us why this glass that you have is special?
Yeah, so assuming that I keep to my word and keep to my current pledge with all the life changes I'm making at the moment, this is my last glass of wine or my last sip of alcohol altogether, as far as I have it planned out and committed to for my life so far. I've been, I've been going through a lot of life changes, and I've been trying to focus on my own physical and mental health quite a bit. So I've just been exercising, meditating, going to therapy, researching how to be just a healthier person, how to have more mental clarity and feel better in general. And I've often come across the suggestion that, have you tried cutting out alcohol because of all the health benefits / just like avoiding all the negative health consequences of alcohol? To me, that seemed like, that seems like a relatively easy adjustment I could make in my life and see how it goes. And honestly, Jeremy, you were my one hesitation with that, right? I have a lot of friends who are like IPA bros. I have friends who I meet at bars and stuff like that. That seems like that'll be easy enough to just get a water or to get a non-alcoholic beverage, and I can still hang out with those people. But I really wanted to come on your show, and I felt like it would truly be sacrilege to come on the show and talk theology without partaking in wine. So it seemed like the stars were aligning, and I thought maybe I could sort of eventize my last sip of alcohol and call it my last supper, if you will. So that was my idea.
I like it. It's funny. I'll have people sometimes will say they'll like apologize in like a conversation to me that they don't drink wine because they know, I'm obviously pretty wrapped up in the wine scene these days. And, sometimes someone will say something like, like alcoholism runs in my family, like nothing personal, but, I don't drink, as if I'm going to be offended, that they won't drink with me. And I've always thought I need to say it more, but like it's not healthy for everyone to drink alcohol. Like there are some people that I'd absolutely say like you shouldn't drink alcohol. Like if you know that you can't control yourself when you're drinking, if that's you listening or watching, please stop drinking alcohol. Like it's not a thing you need to do. Or if every time you drink it goes to excess and you don't like the version of you become, don't keep drinking. I mean, like there's like so many reasons. And, you know, as people who will say like, oh, alcoholism runs in my family, I've never had a problem with it, but I don't want to, you know, tempt that. Like totally fine. And so I think I need to say that enough, you know, just to like remind people, like, I'm not just like everybody should drink more wine. My point is just, I have, you know, experienced a healthy version of it in moderation that I want to invite other people to experience. And for a lot of people, they can, and they experience that, but for a variety of reasons, that's not someone's situation. And so for you, I totally support it. I think it's cool that you're, you know, commemorating the last glass as far as you know, right? The last glass for an indefinite period of your life. And you can go back and listen and watch this video over and over to relive this last glass if you need to.
Yeah. Next time I feel like getting sloshed, I'll just remember, you know, we always had that one time that Jeremy and I did it together. So I don't need to drown my sorrows any further.
We had that one glass that one time. Okay. You and I did a podcast. I referenced it in the intro called The Forest and the Trees. That was your idea to get into the podcast, and you invited me to read the Bible with you. And this was, you know, part of your journey of kind of coming out of Christianity, deciding you're still curious about it, but you didn't believe it. And then you pitched me this idea, like, what if we read the Bible together and we talked through it? And I got to give you credit, because I have sat on the podcast fence for years and years and years, and nothing was compelling enough, you know, and it just seemed like, I don't know what I would want to talk about and do. And so we tried that. And we, you know, kind of evolved as we went. We did 2 seasons, if you will, 2 different books of the Bible. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed podcasting, ended up getting a whole bunch of podcasting gear and kind of figuring it out with you, and realized that I really enjoyed it. And so I would say that you're partly to credit for Cabernet and Pray, because I only realized I like podcasting through my experiences with you. So first, just want to acknowledge on record, thank you for giving me the nudge on that. But I'm curious now, a little bit removed from the 2 books that we did. We read through all of Romans, all of the book of Hebrews, and literally chapter by chapter. So pretty in-depth discussion there. What has been your takeaway from that, even up to like today, as you look at that? What was kind of any concluding thoughts or like aha moments for you that you went, I really walked away with this idea?
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it too. I definitely don't want to make any promises. I've had a lot of people ask me, not a lot, I've had a handful of people ask me if we're coming back, to which I'll say maybe. You know, like, for the record, Jeremy and I are still on good terms as far as I know. It was more about like the busyness of life and just the uncertainty about can we go the distance? Can we cover the entire Bible? Which was, you know, my initial ambition with this. Also, I mean, I don't know if Jeremy, you obviously have a brand new podcast.
To be fair,
you've clearly moved on. So I understand. We'll always have those 2 seasons. Yeah, I have a lot of takeaways. I enjoyed it so much. It was such a fun experience. I mean, just the technical learning curve of like learning how to like create a podcast and like edit kind of long form video content and audio engineering and, you know, all of the technical difficulties and stuff. That was interesting. And in terms of, you know, sort of like my objections that I came up with for Christianity, the things that I specifically had a problem with, and you would come up with your answers. I always appreciated. You had very thoughtful answers, some more satisfying than others, I must say. But here's my big takeaways from each book or each season. From Hebrews, my biggest personal breakthrough was doing more research and coming to understand more about the doctrine of universalism. I was familiar with universalism. I knew there were people who were Christian who believed everyone's going to heaven. But years ago, when I was a Christian and just throughout much of my life, I didn't take it very seriously. And I always thought it was sort of a niche, like kind of a wishful thinking kind of thing. Didn't think it had a lot of scriptural basis. So reading That All Shall Be Saved by David Bentley Hart and just doing more research and learning that it's actually a much larger and maybe even like a newly emerging or it's getting more traction maybe in the American church as a doctrine. And that was very hopeful to me, because I think that like teaching kids that they're going to hell, or like just instilling the fear of going to hell into people, or using that as a tool to try to convert people is one of the more problematic things about Christianity. So that's a great takeaway. And then from Romans, probably my biggest breakthrough, again, just from doing more research and coming to understand more about how many scholars, both Christian and not, acknowledge the problem of pseudepigrapha, which is to say books of the New Testament that claim to be written by a certain author, specifically the Apostle Paul, that may in fact not be written by the Apostle Paul. And that was a huge breakthrough for me, because it was the most satisfying answer I found for the problem of the more sexist passages, especially in the epistle of 1 Timothy. That was always very troubling for me. I've heard all kinds of explanations for how you can sort of explain that away, and why like it actually is okay for women to speak in church and things like that. And the idea that actually maybe this was not Paul at all. Maybe this was just some random guy who was kind of coasting on Paul's coattails. And that's why there's disagreement between 1 Timothy and Romans and other epistles. That was a huge breakthrough for me. Personally comforting for me, and I feel like it has positive implications overall. It still presents a huge problem for the church, because that means they should like throw out certain books of the New Testament, but that's probably not going to happen. So, yeah.
That was a very, very extensive answer.
Oh, I apologize. I wrote down, you gave me the questions in advance, so I like wrote down my answers so that I have something smart to say.
I was enamored listening to that. Like, wow, that's an engaging answer. So on this journey you've been on, you have, left behind most of the things that you used to believe about God. And, you're still, as you even say, you're still figuring a lot of this out. You're trying new things. I'm curious, looking back, was there like an incident that you can trace back and go, this kind of set it in motion for me? Or would you really say, no, it was a culmination of a whole bunch of things over a season? I just think it's interesting to watch you in this journey. And then I'm always curious, like what started that, or what triggered that?
Yeah, there certainly are a lot of things. I mean, of course, you, Jeremy, know better than anyone. I have like a laundry list of complaints about the Bible and Christianity, and they definitely like came up at different times throughout my life. But I'll say probably the biggest kind of personal catalyst that really caused me to question my own worldview and my own actions was many years ago, probably 10 years ago at this point, when my sister came out as a lesbian. And I, at the time, was total conservative Christian, 100% believed homosexuality is a sin, and was, trying to navigate that of how can I like love and support my sister, but not support her lifestyle choices, the whole love the sinner, hate the sin kind of thing. And I really agonized about it for a long time. She invited me to her wedding. She's married to another woman. And I ultimately decided not to go. And I've regretted that decision basically for the rest of my life. Because I feel like that was a moment where my own worldview, my own Christian beliefs really, really became real to me, in the sense of these things that I believe actually affect other people and can actually like make me be a worse person, make me be a less loving person. Because the way I see it, I chose my own personal doctrine and beliefs over my love for my sister. And it was just like a real world example to me of how religion can do damage to other people.
I've heard you tell that story before, and I think that's, I just appreciate, and I so empathize with that being a determining moment for you of I chose this over my sister, and I think a lot of Christians are even realizing that, where, I've chosen these beliefs or this understanding of these beliefs over people. And, one of the conversations I find myself in a lot these days, and I think more and more people are in this conversation, is like, when our understanding of God or our understanding of the scriptures, when it actually prohibits or hinders us from loving the people in our life, you should pause. You should take a moment and go, okay, why is this belief of mine, creating this separation from you? And, I remember for me, last probably few years, just basically making this like personal statement to myself, like, I'm not going to let any of my understandings of the Bible make me love people less. Like, that's just like a personal thing. So if I find myself hesitant to love someone or show them love, or I can't support, like when I find that, I'm going to really wrestle with that and be very cognizant of it. And so I just appreciate your honesty in sharing that. I think a lot of people can relate, and a lot of people have similar stories of, I made this choice because I thought I was following my convictions on it, and now I look back and go, why? And you're obviously trying to make up for lost time and figure it out and not continue to make those same type of mistakes. One of the reasons that you have decided in this current season to give up stuff and live in a van and kind of choose this lifestyle you're choosing is because of a conversation in the Bible, ironically, that Jesus had with someone, where Jesus told someone to give up all their stuff and to follow him. You put a lot of value in this idea that, and you've referenced it coming from Jesus. And yet you would also say you're not living your life in submission to Jesus. You're not trying to follow Jesus per se. Why do you put so much credit or value in this idea from Jesus if you don't value all the other stuff from Jesus?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that, part of it is just the formative nature of, like, I grew up being taught about Jesus, and I remember like reading the Gospels as a little kid, and even then, like, feeling really challenged about all of the non-materialistic teachings of Jesus. I understand you're saying this is like, I'm convicted by the story of the rich young ruler, right? But I personally would argue that Jesus teaches non-materialism, like, and giving up basically just everything in your life in pursuit of following him, to multiple people, not just to the rich young ruler. I think he specifically like teaches against having personal wealth, and he talks about like not worrying about like where your clothes, where your food is going to come from. I guess like one way to interpret a lot of Jesus's teachings are you should just be okay with like depending on the kindness of other people, because you should be able to kind of walk the earth and travel and like stay with other people's homes and eat their meals, and if they reject you, you shake the dust off your feet and all of that. His teachings were always so radical about leave your family behind, leave your job, your livelihood. He talks about cutting off your hands, gouging out your eyes, becoming a eunuch, which I'm not currently planning on putting those things into practice in a literal way. But again, like I realize, like, whenever I start talking this way, people always like start making the excuses and justifications, saying like, oh, what about Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus didn't have to give up all his stuff. He only had to give up half his stuff. And, what about the centurion? He was a wealthy person. So, I understand that perhaps this is my own personal bias in the way I'm interpreting this. I guess there's a lot of other sort of spiritual or aspirational people who tend to just like gravitate towards this inevitable conclusion that materialism just leads to emptiness. That I consider that to be a really profound like insight that Jesus has. Then again, Jesus is not the only person to say this, but I think it's true nevertheless that we've all experienced that cycle of like buying more things to try to fulfill ourselves, and realizing that you can't like buy your way to happiness, which I know is a very cliche thing, but I've always felt sort of convicted by it and felt like I'm not like living my true non-materialist lifestyle. I'm like compromising by like maybe getting rid of some stuff, or like trying to buy less new things and buy more things thrifted, secondhand, but I'm still like have this comfortable middle class lifestyle. And I've often thought like maybe that's a reason that I'm not connecting with God, because God, how many times have I heard like in sermons people preach against materialism and say like, we can't hear God because we're too distracted with all the other stuff in our lives. And if you would just clear that out, then God would speak to you. I felt that, especially when I was on staff at a church. I felt more like conflicted because here I am like living this comfortable middle class life and getting a salary and getting a retirement plan and everything by like doing ministry, by working at a church. It seemed very opposite to Jesus's message for me. So yeah, I guess that's my answer of like, I acknowledge that I may just be personally convicted more than other people. Again, I'm trying to avoid being too preachy for other people. But I feel like it's something that I've always wanted to pursue, and this feels like a unique moment in my life where I can pursue a non-materialistic lifestyle.
So if you connect with Jesus in that way, why does that not carry over to other things with Jesus?
Yeah. Well, I should say that I think there's a lot of Jesus' teachings that do carry over, like his teachings on love and forgiveness and grace and like nonviolence. You and I have talked about a lot. Like Jesus had pretty radical ideas about that I think the world would be a better place if all of us practiced. I certainly try to practice that one for myself. In terms of why I don't believe like in the resurrection or like in the supernatural claims of Jesus, it's certainly not for lack of trying, because I did believe in all the supernatural stuff for the majority of my life. That's a big part of my deconversion story, is the fact that I always believed that all the stories about Jesus were real and the resurrection was real. And of course, a big part of Jesus' story is the miracles and the healing and the fact that he could just heal people on the spot miraculously, and his disciples could too. Even in the book of Acts, after Jesus left and was no longer on earth, his disciples were able to heal people. And I believe that was still possible in our day. In church, everyone would say that, God still works, God still does miracles. And I had this, I guess, cognitive dissonance for the longest time of thinking like, okay, miraculous stuff does happen. I just haven't seen it yet. It must, and I would just kind of slowly whittle my way down of like, it must happen a really small amount of time. Maybe God only miraculously heals someone like 1% of the time or something like that. And I mean, at a certain point, I just had to admit to myself that I don't believe it. Like if my friend has cancer or something, I thought like, I will still pray for them because why not? Like it's worth a shot, but I don't actually literally believe they're going to be miraculously healed. So, and those implications in my mind spiral all the way back to the original story of Jesus.
So when you think about, okay, so now you're practicing it, you're living in a van. How's it going? Is it different than you imagined, or has it been exactly what you hoped for?
Yeah, it's different than I imagined, I suppose. It's been a lot less like nature-y, a lot more kind of like, sleeping in residential areas outside the city and stuff like that. Because I currently have a part-time job at a coffee shop in Phoenix. So I'm not getting as much time alone in nature. I'm not giving God as much of a chance to speak to me, out in the wilderness as I probably owe to him so far. Generally it's been enjoyable. I've enjoyed it. It can get hot in the afternoons for sure. So I generally try to just like stay inside and kind of like find places to loiter and work on my laptop during the heat of the day. And probably the most difficult thing for me has been just like finding places where I can get quality sleep. I wouldn't say I'm really concerned for my safety, but just I always sort of have a little bit of anxiety of, is someone going to see me like sleeping in like parked on the street or something like that and like knock on the window and tell me to move along. So, going back to the personal health stuff, I feel like that's something I need to be more intentional about, of like getting a little bit further from the urban areas and having more quality time in the wilderness altogether.
Any epiphanies from God so far, or still waiting?
Yeah, still waiting. I don't think I've seen anything supernatural happen so far. Yeah.
You're still fairly early in this journey. And actually, I saw, we didn't even talk about this, not in my notes, but you just blew up on Instagram, right? You had a reel about, I think it was about living in a van that got like over a million views or something. So people are definitely drawn to the story of this, drawn to, someone who's doing it, practicing it. As you think about this journey into like homelessness, non-materialism, all these things, has this been fulfilling so far? Like, have you gone, okay, this, we're just this far into it, but I'm really thriving? Or, do you have this like little check in the back of your mind of like, what have I done? Maybe this isn't sustainable.
Yeah, that's a good question about whether or not it's sustainable. It seems pretty doable so far, though. Again, I do acknowledge that I'm pretty new to it. And like I said, it's been enjoyable so far. I certainly wouldn't complain or say that I'm suffering at all. I do feel incredibly privileged that I get to like choose this lifestyle. Like I could get an apartment or stay with family or friends or something like that. And because of the nature of my lifestyle, I do spend a lot of time just kind of hanging out at places where people who are truly homeless, not by choice, just because of like the hardships in their own life are hanging out. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable and not even really sure like how to like refer to my own lifestyle, because again, like I feel so privileged to be homeless by choice, whereas other people are dishoused because of their life circumstances. So I don't know. I wish I could say I had some kind of profound insight on that in terms of like how I can like help people or just like be more educated on the homelessness problem. I mean, specifically in Phoenix, because that's where I'm located, but just throughout the country and world, it's a huge issue that's difficult for people to know how to solve. So yeah, it's been interesting. Has it been fulfilling? I don't know. I never feel fulfilled. I didn't feel fulfilled before, and still searching for it.
You haven't found it yet, huh?
Yeah. Still haven't found what I'm looking for. As preachers love to say. Yeah.
Have you? It's got me thinking. Have you connected with other people in that community, the homeless community, or not yet?
Not a whole lot. I feel like I haven't like connected that with that many people in the van life community either. Like a little bit on social media and a little bit like when I was traveling cross country and kind of staying on public land, I would like camp at a place where it was like federal land, so you can just like stay there for free. And I would see other people there who were also just clearly living out of their vehicles. So we had some camaraderie there. I had an interaction with where I was sleeping outside of a park, and then in the morning I just went to use the restroom in the park, and another gentleman came up to me and asked, "Hey, are you homeless too?" And so that was kind of a profound moment for me of like, I hadn't like referred to myself as homeless before. So I responded by saying, "Yeah, kind of." And he kind of chuckled and said, "Yeah, kind of." Like, like I've heard that one before. So that's an interesting thing. No, I don't feel like I've made a ton of friends. That I think that's something that I should be more intentional about. But again, I'm kind of like always on the move, kind of trying to never park in the same place twice, so that I don't get caught / don't like bother people too much by parking outside their homes without permission.
Do you think other people should do what you're doing?
Oh man, probably not. As I said in my disclaimer at the beginning, I truly, this might sound like false humility, but yeah, I don't feel like I'm in much of a position to give life advice at this particular moment in my life. I feel like my life is a bit of a mess right now. So, yeah.
Now, one of the things that previous listeners of the Forest and Trees will know all too well, or anybody who follows you for any amount of time, but you are a very passionate vegan as a result of your convictions. Has being a vegan, this is my question to you, has it made you a better person overall? And if so, how? I know you have reasons why you're vegan, but that's not my question. My question is, has it made you a better person?
the way you worded that question is so difficult because it seems really gross and problematic to say that, yeah, I'm a better person than you, Jeremy. Yeah.
Oh, not than me.
obviously.
It's not comparative.
Mhm.
Has it made you a better version of you?
Yeah. I'll say that the practice of veganism for me is a way for me to attempt to do less harm. Like I shared on the Forest and Trees a couple times before, like it initially started just not eating meat because of the environmental impact, because I was trying to like recycle and not drive and not like buy consumer goods as much as possible to reduce my environmental impact. And then I learned that the meat production actually produces more emissions than driving a vehicle does. So that was kind of my gateway into it. And of course you're directly doing less harm to animals by not supporting the slaughter of them. And the health benefits are, I say, generally overall positive for a vegan diet. Of course, it doesn't have to be because Oreos are vegan. There's all kinds of processed, unhealthy vegan foods. But yeah, generally, I think that veganism is a way for me to try to do less harm to the environment, to animals, and to my own body, hopefully.
You stated in your bio intro that I quoted that you are uncertain about almost everything, which I thought was quite a phrase. But as I started that phrase, I thought, well, but you're very passionate about veganism, and you don't seem remotely uncertain about that. Is this your main passion now, or do you have others?
Yeah, I have a lot of passions, but in terms of like morality issues and ethics, I think this one is just the most clear and straightforward. I'll quote again Gabrielle Zevin: "This life is filled with inescapable moral compromises. We should do what we can to avoid the easy ones." I think that, of course, there's so many problems in this world with war and human violence and exploitation and things like that. I like many people have been like trying to keep up with the news about everything going on in Israel, Palestine, for example. And part of me feels like, oh, I should speak up and like have something to say about this. I've been silent because I honestly don't even know like how to address it. Like the base part of me thinks like I should just say like, I condemn all violence, just no more fighting. Let's everyone stop the fighting. That even that seems like too simplistic and naive and like probably not helpful right now. And just like gun violence on our own country, I guess, like, I practice that by just not being a gun owner myself, I suppose. I think it'd be great if all of us were not gun owners, but so maybe I should be more outspoken about that. But with doing harm to animals specifically, it's kind of a unique situation because it's something that almost everyone does every day over and over again and feels almost no remorse for. So I personally believe that like if we want to be people who are making peace, who are making the world a better, more non-violent place, like the best way to do that is to begin by practicing peace and non-violence. And I think by doing something that you can do like right now, today in your own life, by just choosing what you eat for your next meal, you can actively choose to practice non-violence. And I think that extends beyond just the animal kingdom to the humans in our lives as well.
You don't seem uncertain about almost everything, Jeff.
I mean, again, like I feel like so many of the moral issues in our world are much more complex, and this is an easy one for me. I guess I can do more caveats of people will say like, oh, I have a medical condition, but probably the best argument against it is like the fact that I'm speaking from a place of privilege, which again I will acknowledge. Yeah, maybe there are people in other parts of the world where that just isn't an option for them, but to the middle class people in Phoenix, Arizona, all of them can choose whether to get a veggie burger or a regular burger when they get dinner tonight. So
we were going through before that we recorded. I was just trying to wrap my head around like practically what Jeff eats. And so it was like, oh, so you'd have a burrito. It's like, yeah, a bean burrito with no cheese. I'm like, oh yeah, dairy. Like I just kept thinking of like all the things that like eggs. Like I think there's a lot of things too that people don't necessarily automatically go, oh, obviously veganism includes XYZ. You obviously live this lifestyle. But the people who are listening and watching probably not as familiar with like, okay, how would you order a meal, in a different restaurant? Like what options do you have left? It's not as many. It's not as many options.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me, Jeremy. I do feel like maybe if I spend too much time in my own vegan bubble, I can forget how uneducated people are in general about like what veganism even is. I guess I was assuming it was common knowledge, but yeah, it means just no animal products. So like if you're vegetarian, that means you don't eat meat, but you can eat like dairy and eggs and other products that come from an animal. Vegan means you do, to the best of your abilities, you eliminate all consumption of animal products. So, if milk, eggs, cheese, leather products, just anything that involves like exploiting of animals to reap their resources.
There you go. On that note, I think it's time for a drink break. All right, Jef, we're going to do a hard pivot. After veganism, I'm going to go to wine. Whenever I do a drink break, I always ask the guest, I would love to hear a story about an incredible wine experience you've had. I already at this point in the podcast, I have received quite a diversity of answers to this question. And so I never know what I'm going to get. So I have no idea where you're going to go with this. Do you have a standout moment with wine where the stars aligned, you sipped that thing in your glass and you went, holy cow, this is incredible?
Yeah. So I'll say like, I think wine is pretty tasty in general. But I don't have the distinctive palate that you were blessed with, Jeremy. So I've had plenty of like, lovely evenings. I've had plenty of lovely experiences where I'm like having dinner with friends and we're drinking wine and having great conversation and laughing. I don't have a specific one that stands out for that. I did think of kind of a funny story that involves not only wine, but also communion.
Okay.
So several years ago when I was sort of deconstructing, I was still a Christian, but still, struggling with all of my disillusionment from all this stuff, still on staff at a church. I had some vacation time. So I decided to go to a monastery in New Mexico and stay there for a few days and practice like silence and meditation. And I went to the mass and everything. And so the mass was all in Latin. So I wasn't following at all what they were saying. But there came a time where clearly it was time to take communion because some people stood up and went forward and took the elements and some people didn't. And I was kind of unclear about whether I was allowed to or not, but decided to just go for it. So I went forward and took the bread and the wine and then sat back down, and I was kind of sitting on the pew looking at it. Like I wasn't exactly, do I take it now or do I wait until later? I wasn't sure. And then a priest came up to me and whispered, "You're not Catholic, are you?" And I said, "No." And he just swiped them from my hand, said like, clearly I was not, you're not allowed to take communion at this place if you're not Catholic. So yeah, that was my my communion story.
You got communion taken away from you.
Yeah, I got swiped. Yeah, it almost felt like a moment from like Curb Your Enthusiasm or something. Yeah, it was. I consider it a pretty hilarious story about the way that like religious people can be so welcoming and tolerant of newcomers.
That's brutal. It's funny. You made me realize my first sip of wine was at a Catholic church. I was a kid and my friend was Catholic and he invited me to mass with him one weekend. And I was like, yeah, I'll go. Curious how different it could be from my church. And the answer was very different. It was very different. And, it comes time for communion and I'm like, yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm going to take communion. So I walk up in line with them. I didn't know that it was wine in the glass. Like that's how Protestant I was. Had no clue as a kid that this is going to be wine. I also didn't know that, like, I don't know if they still do this post-COVID, But like there was just one chalice, and everybody would kind of like sip it or whatever, put their lip on it. I didn't know you were just like supposed to like put your lip on it. So I get up there and I like swig the thing and I'm like flooded with, holy cow, what is that? And probably the priest had a similar action to you of like, this kid's not Catholic. How is he up here? But I'd already drank it at that point. So what is he going to do? How's he going to get Jesus' blood back out of me? But that was like my moment of like, I sat back down and went, dude, that's not grape juice. He's like, yeah, it's wine. Like, what? So there you go.
Yeah.
Communion.
Yeah, no, I've had those experiences too where, I was always a grape juice kid at all the churches I went to when I was younger. And then the handful of times we would go to some other church and it would be real wine and I would be like weirded out by the taste of it because of course my little kid palate just thought wine was disgusting. But I just kept it cool. I only had one time where it was swiped from me, as I just said.
On an aside, for any pastors watching or listening this, my favorite thing, this is just my personal preference. I think it's really cool when there's like a communion station and they offer both, where it's like, here's grape juice if you want that. And then here's wine if you want that. And you just let people with all their experiences or wherever they, however they've encountered it before. I also strongly believe that communion should be open to all. And I cringe that the priest took it from you because if you read the scriptures, Jesus celebrated communion, the Last Supper, literally the Last Supper, with Judas right before Judas betrayed him. And I'm pretty sure if Judas can have the Last Supper, Jef can too. I'm just saying. I'll get off my.
Yeah. We're simpatico, Judas and I, for sure. We're right on the razor's edge.
Just saying, Judas can have it. Why do we get this line where we're like, I gotta enforce this? I've never understood that camp.
Yeah.
Okay, so on a more serious note, and you have obviously given me permission to go here. So just in advance, if someone's like, "Wow, I can't believe he's asking this question," you've recently gone through a divorce, and you've shared a little bit about this online. This was a culmination of a lot of your journey up to this point. It's also a turning point, as you've stated, kind of for the season that you're in now. How are you doing? How are you processing that?
Yeah, I mean, emotionally, it's been really awful. It's very much still raw. It's been about 2 months at this point, and I'm predicting it's going to be many months of grieving, years, probably the rest of my life to some extent to go. It's really sad. I feel all kinds of like shame and self-doubt about it. This goes back to my initial caveat about like, don't take advice from me. My personal life is a mess. I feel like it sort of taints all of my preachiness and all of my opinions and all my thoughts about all kinds of things that I've chosen for my life. I guess I should say it for the record. It's not like I like just left the marriage because I like wanted to live in a van so bad. That certainly was part of it. Was my wife and I had different values and all that. There were a lot of differences that I'm not going to get into, but I'll say that because of that circumstance, I felt like I need to take this opportunity because I no longer have like the responsibilities of marriage to live this like non-materialistic lifestyle that I've always kind of thought about and felt like I didn't have the opportunity to before. But again, it's awful and I feel terrible about it. And as I said, I'm going to therapy. That's the reason that I'm decided to quit drinking, because I've been in a pretty sad and lonely state generally. And I've heard other stories of people who've turned to alcohol when they are sad and lonely. And that's a pretty dangerous combination. So I'm just trying to preemptively avoid that kind of problem in my life. And yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Obviously a marriage is two people, takes two people. We don't need to speak on behalf of your wife, but from your point of view, I'm just curious, you've changed so much, from who you were when you got married. Do you look back and think, there's so many things I would have done different and maybe it would have played out different? do you think maybe I never would have gotten married if I was who I am now? How is that with the journey you've been on to try to make sense of that? Or do you just feel like this is the inevitable end that it was always going to run? Like, how do you kind of process all that in light of your own growth and change?
Yeah, I think about it all the time, and it's really difficult because I feel like our thoughts can be so deceptive and so easily biased. And I mean, this is something that I'm like talking to my therapist about all the time, for sure. But yeah, and again, I'm trying to like avoid like just blaming my current problems the fact that I'm divorced now on Christianity. Certainly that is a huge factor in it, because the fact that we got married so young, right out of Bible college, and we were both like on fire for the Lord and wanted to be missionaries, and we thought we got to get married and then like pack our bags and go. That's kind of the origin story of how my wife and I came together in the first place. And yeah, throughout the years of being married, when both of our worldviews changed and we both like grew in different ways, I thought about that all the time, of like, what would have happened if we would have still met and been dating and fallen in love, but not been in that culture where we felt pressured to get married right away. Like, what if we were allowed to cohabitate and have sex outside of marriage and all that stuff that, like secular people outside the church do? Would we still be together now? Would we have broken up earlier? Because it's easier to break up than it is to get divorced when you're already in the marriage covenant. I try not, I kind of naturally like do that kind of like hindsight bias, like fantasizing about going back into the past type of thinking. I'm trying to just avoid that at this point and just like accept that what happened did and move forward with this. I really like cherish all of the time that we had together. It was obviously a person that I love very much, and I only want the best for them. And again, it was an incredibly difficult decision, but it was a decision we both came to agree to, that it was the best for both of us to no longer be married and go our separate ways. So that's where I'm at, but it's an incredibly sad thing.
Yeah. I do just want to applaud you for the way you just lean into hard things, and you're not sugarcoating this. You're not acting like, yeah, no big deal, I got divorced and I'm fine. You're not fine, and you're experiencing all that we would expect someone to experience, who's going through a loss like that, and you're very transparent about it. And even online, I've watched some of your posts, and there's been a few of your things that I'm like, wow, like you just put that out there, you're just very open with that, but you're also willing to, to do what you think you need to do in response and to try things. And I think that's why I've always admired you and, have a lot of respect for you, just because sometimes when we think about like, okay, if I did this, it would be better. We imagine it, we think about it, and then we kind of pat ourselves on the back of like, I did it because I thought about it. It's like, no, until you do it, you haven't done it. So just because you thought about it or talked about it or had a conversation, you have to go do it. You're doing it. But I also want to be aware, there might be some listening to this, watching this, that would say, and you've even wondered this aloud to me as well, that, this guy's taking things too far. Like this guy's really gone extreme. You don't have to go this extreme. What are your thoughts on that? Do you ever like spend a lot of time on like, maybe this is way too far, way too much? Or do you think, hey, I'm just getting started. Look how deep this rabbit hole goes.
You ain't seen nothing yet. How much further can I blow up my life? Yeah. Great question. Yeah. I think about it all the time. I feel like, again, just going back to my caveats and my like uncertainty about everything. Again, like I guess like veganism is, again, like one of the few things that I do feel fairly certain about, of like, for most people, most of the time, I think I can say that, yeah, that's a positive thing. Or that's a way, not even a positive, that's a way that you can do less harm in the world. In terms of like the materialism, like the not owning a home, living out of a van, just deciding to get divorced because you're in an unfulfilling relationship. Those are things that I would never encourage anyone to go into lightly. And yeah, I have all kinds of self-doubt about whether or not I'm taking it too far for myself. Even the alcohol thing, I have hesitation for that. Part of me thinks like, that's no big deal. Like, I don't drink that much anyway, and it's easy enough to just get a non-alcoholic beverage in public places. My one hesitation is like, do I have this kind of addiction to legalism, or am I trying to like cope with the uncertainty of life by making these really strict rules? Again, I think that's something that Jesus was like taught about a lot. Like, he was always calling out the Pharisees for being hypocritical and being legalistic and all about the letter of the law. So yeah, certainly that's a hesitation that I have about all kinds of things that I'm currently introducing into my life.
Now, sometimes this is another thing I find interesting about you. You will attend church services from time to time, and you and I would periodically talk about experiences that you had or a church you popped into. Whenever you go, though, as best I understand it, you don't take communion. And even though we've talked about some older communion stories in your life, tell us why. Why do you, even if you pop into church these days, why do you not take communion?
Yeah, the reason I go to church sometimes is just because I find it interesting. Again, like that was why I wanted to start the podcast, and why I again invited myself onto your podcast here, was like, I really enjoy having these conversations with people. I'm really like fascinated with Christianity. Again, like I feel like it's possible that I've just been like, it's sort of like permanently broken my brain, and I'm gonna be stuck having these conversations for the rest of my life. But who knows? But I really enjoy kind of like the variety of different interpretations. That was something I learned on the Forest and the Trees, was like, as I was researching these different questions, you had your answers, but the stereotype is true that if you ask 10 different pastors the same theological question, you'll get 10 different answers, or possibly more. So I enjoy that process of kind of like sampling and seeing how different people like interpret the same scriptures and stuff like that. The reason I don't partake in communion anymore is because I still just cannot stomach the doctrine of blood atonement, blood sacrifice. I know that you and I like went back and forth on that for a long time, and I made a video on YouTube that's an hour long of us talking about it with several different passages throughout Hebrews. And I've re-listened to it. I've revisited it several times, and I've listened to other theologians give their explanation for it. And I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense how this is a good thing that we should celebrate, in terms of, as far as I understand, the idea of communion is like a celebration or recognition of Jesus' sacrifice. Like the fact that he suffered and shed his blood so that we can be forgiven is something we're supposed to continually remember. And yeah, it just doesn't sit well with me. It seems like a bad, barbaric, disgusting thing.
So I'm going to give a little plug here. As of the time you and I are recording this, episode 7 has not posted. But episode 7, I have already recorded at the time of this recording. So episode 7, I get into what's called mimetic theory. And my guest goes into a really interesting explanation for the atonement based out of mimetic theory that I actually would be curious your take on, because it was a different kind of angle than even I have thought of it. And so I've always fascinated, you talk about all the different answers that pastors give. You just look at atonement theory alone. There are so many different ways of thinking about it, explaining it, understanding it. And, you can read books and books and books on atonement theory alone. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, what the heck is atonement theory? There's a whole explanation of why did Jesus have to die and how do we make sense of that? And, Jeff's saying none of them resonate with him. But Jef, you're gonna have to check out episode 7 after I post it, and I'll be curious your thoughts on that. Okay, so
I definitely will. I'm excited to listen. Yeah,
awesome. Let's take a look at Christianity. Take a step out, 30,000 foot view. not the church, we'll get to that next question, but just Christianity, let's say in America, what do you see as some of the main issues facing Christianity from your point of view?
The answer I put down is like probably the biggest problem is the uncertainty of whether or not God exists. You know, like I feel like if God were to show up and like, you know, do something about like, so you're talking about America. So like, let's say like if God were to show up and like stop gun violence from happening anymore because of all the thoughts and prayers that we've offered to him, that would be a huge win for Christianity in my mind. You know, I know it's like kind of unfair to bring up the problem of evil of like, if God is all good and why do bad things happen? But yeah, I guess for me, you know, there's all kinds of ethical questions with Christianity, or like are we taking the Bible too literally, or are we being too fast and loose with the Bible? But I mean, ultimately the main problem is like, it just starts with the issue of like whether or not God exists in the first place. And for me personally, I know most of your listeners won't resonate with this, but for me, it doesn't seem apparent that he does. So, yeah.
Or she,
yeah. Or, you know, hit the force, whatever.
The force.
It could.
Okay, as you look at now the church in America specifically, what do you see as the main issues facing the church, the way we understand church?
Yeah, I mean, to go back to my personal story with the anti-LGBTQ persuasion, again, like I've read the Bible, so I understand like why the church is anti-homosexual, because I think like certain passages of scripture are pretty explicitly anti-homosexual. I do think it's fascinating that the church is so hung up on trans issues at the moment. I don't really see much biblical precedence for that. There's not a lot of stuff in the Bible that says you can't change genders the way there's like passages in the Bible that say you shouldn't like have gay sex. The doctrine of hell, I think, is totally problematic. I think it's kind of systematically traumatizing children by like taking them to summer camp and like getting the fear of hell in them so that they'll make a decision Thursday night. I think that's an underrated issue. I think that does more psychological damage to people than we realize. And I'll say the dependence on money, the way that they ask people for money and say that, you know, this is an obligation. This is something you have to do. You're giving money to God. It's all God's anyway, so you need to give 10% of it to us, I think is manipulative, and theologically it makes no sense to me. It doesn't make sense why God would need to use human currency to achieve his goals. Why can't God just make church happen miraculously? So those are my big three issues.
So that's a spicy hot take. I like it.
Oh, thank you.
What's a problem that you're trying to solve in your world right now?
Yeah, for me personally, I'm trying to have more positive interactions with other homeless people, like we talked about a little bit before. I think, you know, there's a lot of people that are just like nice and gentle and easy to talk to, but there's also a lot of people who clearly have some kind of mental problems they're dealing with, and some people who seem you know, to be like violent potentially, or just like ranting and screaming uncontrollably. And I kind of instinctively like have a fear of people like that, because I'm not sure if they're going to act out violently if I try to approach them or something. And that's something I feel very conflicted about, because again, going back to like, what would Jesus do? It seems to me that Jesus has such an empathetic heart for the poor and the people who are disenfranchised and the people who everyone else is like the untouchables in society. And so when I see someone like that kind of like on the street, I feel bad for them. I wish there was something I could do to help them. And I feel like the fact that I have this fear of even approaching them is a problematic thing on my part. So that's a personal problem I'm kind of working through at the moment.
That's good. What's something you're excited about right now?
Travel, #van life. I feel like, initially I had kind of all this excitement, like when I got rid of all my stuff and when I bought a van, and I was going to kind of just like travel around aimlessly and just like sustain myself doing freelance work. And because of kind of weird circumstances, I ended up getting this job at this coffee shop and kind of decided that I'm going to take some time to just sort of lay low, kind of survive the winter here in Phoenix while the weather is nice, and kind of figure out what I want to do next. Because again, like I could like get an apartment and stay in the Phoenix area long term, but I kind of want to avoid that as much as possible. So I think I might just kind of travel freely or do some kind of seasonal work or something like that. So yeah, I'm excited for the future of that.
Anything you want to plug for our audience? Anything that you're working on? You're obviously an amazing creator, designer, illustrator. A lot of people who know you obviously will know that. But if our audience is listening to like, this guy's fascinating, what can they do to follow along or to keep up with you?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, you can follow me on social media. I'm at Jef Caine, Jef, Jef with one F, just on all the social medias. And jefcaine.com is my portfolio, like website with my illustration, graphic design stuff. I feel like I need to lean more into like the creative art side of myself more. I feel like I've been leaning a lot more on kind of the self-expression, exploring my own feelings, making videos about lifestyle and stuff more recently, which I don't know. I feel like I'm losing like the creative side of me or something like that. So I need to practice more of the art stuff. So follow me for that. Pastors who are listening or fellow Christians who are not vegan, I wanted to like put out my definitive argument on why all Christians should be vegan before this episode aired. So I've got that on my YouTube channel. For years, honestly, I know it's like a niche hot take that like literally no one cares about and everyone just rolls their eyes at. But for me, it was kind of a personal obsession of like I had these arguments in my head, and I kind of fantasized about what if I was given the opportunity to like speak at a church or something like that and just spring like a 45-minute presentation on people. And I guess eventually I came to accept that that's probably not going to happen. So I'm just going to like make a YouTube video about it. So it's just a resource for people if they're curious. I ended up being able to edit it down to 3.5 minutes. So, it's not a very long video.
Pretty punchy.
If you're curious. So yeah, so I'll plug that. That's, I'm at Jef Caine on YouTube. So you can watch that video if you're curious.
Nice. I would love to attend a vegan sermon that a church says, yes, here you go, Jef. Here's the pulpit for 45 minutes. Talk about veganism. That would be,
I don't know.
I would just come for the reactions. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to see the reactions, you can like look at the comments on my social media. Cause I posted like kind of the short, like 1-minute version of just the first argument basically. Which again, like that might've been a terrible decision, just like being needlessly divisive, and no one really cares about my opinion on these things anyway, but I've got to speak my truth, Jeremy. No, I don't know. I mean, I guess I got a lot of likes. Most of the comments were people who disagreed with me, but again, that's good. That's reasonable. That's what social discourse is for, right?
Well, Jef, dude, I appreciate you. It is great to check in with you. I think we're going to have to do this again and just periodically check in, see where you're at, where your van life has taken you, what new things you've cut out of your life, and how it's all working for you and what it's producing. And you're kind of, to me, like I don't mean this condescendingly, but like a walking experiment. Like what happens if you try that? It's like I watch you and like, I don't know, I'm gonna see what happens to Jef. Like it's just fascinating to follow someone who's trying these things and being transparent about the experience, the good and the bad, and you do a great job of that. So thank you for taking the time to drive your van over to my place and drink that final glass with me. So cheers to you, to a memorable glass that you can remember as being documented in this episode for a long time, and wherever your van takes you in the road ahead. So thank you from all of us. And To all the listeners and watchers of Cabernet and Pray, thank you guys for being a part of this. Hopefully this was an enjoyable conversation for you as we get to explore Christianity and wine through all different aspects. We'll catch up with all of you next time.
Thanks for joining us for Cabernet and Pray. We'd love to hear what you thought of today's episode or what you'd like to see more of in the future. You can email us at cheers@communionwineco.com. And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us online at communionwineco.com.